So you take this sheet of paper and you crumple it up. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the pop group, the Cowsills. You may remember them if you're old enough. Late 60s, even into the early 1970s, if I recall, they had several big hits. How did that group get started? Well, from what I understand, it started with four Cowsill brothers, and they wanted to be like the Beatles. And they even fantasized about being on the Ed Sullivan Show, which back in that time was the biggest of big deals. That's what launched people's careers, just be on the Ed Sullivan Show. That was their dream, that was their goal, and that's where they were heading, but there was one caveat. There was one problem, and that was they had this dad, and their dad wanted their mom to join the group. Now, I want you to think about the Beatles, and one of their moms joins the group as a lead singer, or one of the singers. Would not be the Beatles, would it? But totally something different. But, you know, the Cowsills, Dad says your mom has to be in the group, and these guys still living it on. They didn't have any choice. They wanted to be like the Beatles, but no, they're not going to be like the Beatles. They're going to be like the Beatles with their mom. Well, then Dad took it a step further and said, hey, your sister's going to be in the group too. Now, this is getting out of hand. But then the dad said, okay, you got this other brother, and you're all going to be in the group. And there was one brother who went to Vietnam, during the war there. And they were all in the group. This was not the Beatles. But they were phenomenally successful because, are you ready for this? Because in a sense, they were like the Beatles. Also, well, one of the things that made the Beatles successful was they were themselves. They were originals. They just did their thing. The thing that made the Cowsills phenomenally successful is they were originals. There was no other pop group like them. They just did their thing. So they became like the Beatles by being not like the Beatles. So what does that have to do with people with Asperger syndrome and autism? Well, sometimes those of us with Asperger syndrome, we want to be like the Beatles. We want to be like everyone else. And we think the way to do that is to mimic them, to mask. We call this cloning. But we find out what everyone else is doing is they're just being themselves. That's it. They're just being who they are. So if we want to be like them, we have to be originals. We have to be who we are. But the problem is who we are is not who they are. It's as different as the Cowsills and the Beatles. But is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, for the Cowsills, no, it wasn't. It was a very, very positive thing, at least when it comes to the success of it. So the first thing we're realizing is this. Masking is, I call it cloning, where we're trying to be like everyone else, look like everyone else. But what we fail to realize is that what everyone else is doing is they are just being themselves. So if we want to be like everyone else, we will be just like ourselves, but that means we've got to be different. We have to embrace the fact that we are different, that we are unique. There's something special about us that other people, they may not get it, they may not see it, but that's how you be like everyone else. You don't try to clone them. You just be who you are. Now, that sounds counterintuitive, but that's the way it works. So the irony is that being themselves requires them, talking about neurotypical people, not being themselves, well, up to a point, because the thing about neurotypical people is being themselves, they like to be stylish. People who have Asperger syndrome, we can appreciate style, at least I do. That's why I wear the exact same shirt every day, you can tell. But we can appreciate style, but, form follows function. We'd rather be functional than being stylish. Now, people see people with Asperger syndrome, neurotypical people, see those of us who are eccentric as being eccentric. We're just kind of a little bit weird because we're so practical. We do things the way that functions the best because, again, form follows function. Well, with a person who is neurotypical, who is concentric, as opposed to eccentric, they get it backwards. Its style precedes being practical. So form doesn't follow function, but function follows form. I'm going to be in style, and if my style is uncomfortable, well, at least I'm in style. I'm comfortable being in style, even though the clothes that I'm wearing are terribly uncomfortable, or maybe they're too hot or too cold for the weather. Maybe they're not adapted to whatever's going on in my environment, but I'm in style. What are they doing? They're just doing what comes natural. That's how neurotypical concentric people think. So if you want to be like concentric people, neurotypical people, just got to be yourself. But that makes us very different. I don't see that as a particular problem. Sometimes it is, but by and large, once we embrace ourselves as we are, one of the things that's missing that people reject about us is we have this seem to have this lack of confidence. But once we embrace ourselves, now this is who I am, and if anyone doesn't like it, well, I guess they're not going to like it. And what happens is when we have that attitude, not all the time, but a lot of the time people like us because we don't care if they like us or not. Strange as it may seem, and all of this seems to lack intuition. It all seems to be backwards. It all seems to be contradictory. The way to be in style is to not to be in style. The way to be accepted is to have confidence, and then you'll be accepted. You know, the way to be like everyone else is to be natural and not like them, but be like yourself. But that's the way this works. Number 4 is once the mask slips, that is to say, if you're trying to be a clone, once the mask slips, people will never see you the same because they've seen behind the mask. They can't unsee what they've seen. And their attitude toward you will shift 180 degrees. You're just a totally different person. A way to think of this is you take just a sheet of paper, right? And you crumple it up. A nice clean sheet of paper, just happen to have one right here. So you take this sheet of paper and you crumple it up. Say, well, I don't want it crumpled, I want it straight, the way that it was. All right, so I'm going to uncrumple it. It's not the same. So that is, figuratively speaking, that is what we are doing when we wear a mask and we let the mask slip. And we can't help it. Eventually, it's going to slip. Well, they never see you the way that they saw you before. Now, they will see you as a crumpled piece of paper. But what if you just started out crumpled? Well, then they just accept you for who you are if they're going to accept you at all. And if you don't do that, they're going to see it anyhow, so what's the point? Number 5, finally, is this. Trying to be like them is just not going to work. Unless we understand that being like them means we're going to be ourselves. But trying to clone them, look the way they look, think the way they think, behave the way they think, it is so obvious. Eventually, it's going to be so obvious. We may get away with it for a while, but eventually the real us, that is to say, our Asperger syndrome, our high-functioning autism, it's going to become very evident. They're going to see it. So the whole point is this. If you want to be like the Beatles, just be yourself, because that's what the Beatles were. They were themselves. See those 2 rectangles on the screen? Let's keep talking if you want. Just click one of those 2 rectangles. Our conversation will go on. But if not, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you all next time.